Good evening, my dear friends. Welcome to this new session of Top 10. Thank you for joining us today. Today's session is brought to you by Dentoscope Academy in association with CIPLA, Famdent Publications, Famdent Shows, Famdent Awards, and Future Dent. I'm Dr. Anil Arora, editor of Famdent and Endodent and director of Famdent Shows and Awards. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all today. Continuing with this top 10 series. Now, we have all gone through a lot of, broad topics. So we thought, let us get down to the nitty gritty of each topic and dissect them at the base level. So what better way to start endodontics than to understand what are the top 10 tips and tricks for access opening. This is where it all starts. And trust me, it's one of the most important steps to ensure that your endo is successful. So we are joined today by eminent faculty, Dr. Harsh Shah, who has earlier also been a speaker at Dentoscope Academy. And I'm joined with Dr. Samira Sheikh, who will be moderating today's session. She's an implantologist and prosthodontist and an associate in my clinic. She will now introduce Dr. Shah and take it further. Over to you, Samira.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Top 10 series. The topic for today's discussion is access opening in root canal treatment. We bring to you a very young and dynamic speaker, Dr. Harsh Shah, to give us 10 important takeaway points for successful access opening. Dr. Harsh Shah is MDS in Conservative Dentistry and Endodontics. He is an accredited member and director of board of the Indian Academy of Aesthetic and Cosmetic Dentistry. He is a key opinion leader for Colteen, Micromega, and Ivoclar Vivadent. Dr. Harsh delivers lectures and conducts workshops on basic rotary and advanced endodontics, post and core, and porcelain veneers. He has authored and co-authored numerous publications on endodontics and aesthetic dentistry in several national and international journals. Thank you, Dr. Harsh, for joining us once again. You may take over now.
My pleasure, Dr. Samira. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. So Dr. Samira is our constant companion for lectures of the Dentoscope Academy. So the topic that we'll be discussing today, like you've been told, is we'll be sharing a lot of tips and tricks for access opening. And when we talk about access opening, I have realized that somewhere we have lost that interest. It's become more of a race where we don't spend more than probably 4 to 5 minutes for an entire tooth access. And because of this, very often there are certain mishaps that occur, and then it becomes very difficult to tackle them. Which is why they say that the success of your treatment entirely depends on the kind of access that you do or the way you start your treatment. So this is exactly what we'll be discussing today. I am not here to discuss about how many canals you are expected to find, where exactly in the tooth is the access, is the pulp chamber present. We are here to discuss about 110% clinical tips and tricks which will help you go from a very good practitioner to the best practitioner possible when it comes to root canals. So without much ado, let us start with a couple of points that I want to make clear first here. So when you talk of access, why do we require an access? The entire reason for needing an access, or the objective of an access, is basically to reach the apical area of the tooth without any hindrance. An access opening does not mean that the moment you locate your canals, your access is done. The objective of an access is not to find your canals. The objective of access is that all your instruments should reach up till the apical third of the canal without any hindrance. So it has to be reproducible, which means that every time I take an instrument and I put it inside, I should not have anything coming in the way. And when I say this, this is why I wanted to stress this, because the coronal flaring or the orifice widening that we perform is also a part of access opening. Your access opening does not end with the burr. It goes all the way up to your Gates Glidden drills or your orifice shaping files that you use. Now that we know the objective, the next question that we have in mind is, Is access supposed to be extremely small? So the point I want to make here is, as we have moved into minimal intervention dentistry, we've all heard about conservative access openings, which were then later modified into ultra conservative access openings. But what has been happening is, as we move towards conservation of tooth structure, there are certain other difficulties that we've started encountering, like missed canals, ledges, separated instruments, because the smaller your access becomes, the more difficult it becomes to instrument, irrigate, and obturate. So I want to make it very clear here, conservative access openings are extremely beneficial as far as all other goals of root canal treatment can be achieved. Don't run behind making your access as small as possible if you're going to have difficulties in the further steps, because coronal tooth structure, although very important and vital, it is not sacred. It is okay to sacrifice 0.5 millimeter of extra tooth structure if it can make your entire root canal treatment better. The next point here we'll talk about is, now we all know that when you are performing endodontic treatment, you have to place a rubber dam. So very often one question which is asked is, should I place the rubber dam after the access or before the access? Because there is quite a lot of text which tells you that rubber dam application should be done after the access opening is completed. Now, if you follow all the recent literature, what we've realized is that it is better to place your rubber dam before you start your access, after anesthesia, of course. But in case you feel that a tooth has certain anatomical variations which may lead to difficulty during access opening, then you may defer the rubber dam placement. I want to make it very clear here that when you talk of a situation like the COVID pandemic that we are facing right now, I would very strongly recommend that you place your rubber dam before you perform access opening. Give anesthesia to the patient, apply your rubber dam, and then start your access, because this is the best barrier that you can have between yourself and a COVID positive patient. So coming to the 10 tips that we are going to discuss today. The first and most basic tip that I want to give here is, please use a good mirror, because nothing is as important as good visibility and good illumination than at any step of your endodontic treatment. Because very often what happens is our mirrors are so scratched, or they give you those double ghost images, we don't get an exact idea of the root canal anatomy or the anatomy of the pulp floor. I'll tell you why this is important as we proceed along the slides. But please make sure purchase a mirror which is a front surface mirror, so that you don't get those ghost images, and which can give you fantastic reflection of your light. Because if you don't have adequate illumination, there is no way you'll be able to see inside the pulp chamber. This was a very basic tip just to start off with, because this step I've realized is extremely important. Like most of us, even I had started with using the cheap stainless steel mirrors that we get. It used to cost what, 10-15 rupees, I guess. But then eventually I realized that visibility was becoming a problem, illumination was becoming a problem. And then once you try a front surface mirror, and now we have those HD quality mirrors and ultra HD mirrors. So once you have used a front surface mirror, you will realize what kind of difference we are talking about. You will never want to go back to those local mirrors that we used to use all this while. Coming to tip number 2. Now, tip number 2 is going to talk about where should you start your access opening in anterior teeth. Now, as students, we had learned that we start the access opening for an anterior tooth right in the middle of the tooth. And then if you think traditionally, it was always said that your access opening should be present in the cingulum area. So we used to make a ditch in the cingulum area, and then we used to enter the canal. But here, the main problem is that if you can just go back to your anatomy and think, cingulum is the strongest part of an anterior tooth, and we are drilling right into it. Now, when we are going to drill right into the cingulum, it is going to cause significant weakening of the tooth. And then we do a tooth preparation and we cut the tooth from all 4 sides. So the 2 marginal ridges of an anterior tooth are also lost. And we do incisal reduction as well for the full crown. So the incisal ridge is also lost. And then we say, why did my tooth fracture even after I placed the crown? This was the reason the tooth fractured. First, your access opening should not involve the cingulum. Second, you do not require a crown if you have sufficient healthy tooth structure in an anterior tooth. You may choose to place a fiber post and core buildup, but a crown is generally not required if you're doing endodontic treatment. Now, coming back to the site of access opening, I told you that cingulum is not the place where we do our access opening. Then where should we start our access? a little probably in the middle of the tooth, because this is the conventional access that we have all started with. And these conventional accesses are generally large. Although they spare the cingulum, they involve a major portion of the palatal tooth structure. Now, the problem here is not only weakening of the tooth, but what happens is because your access is present in the middle of the tooth, the moment you want to put any file inside, it never goes straight. So you always have to put a file from the access opening and then it bends down to reach up till the apical third. And this is true for all anterior teeth, which is why in the recent past, it has strongly been advocated that your access openings should be placed as incisal as possible. In an ideal scenario, you would want the access opening to be on the incisal edge, but then it does not look aesthetic enough from the labial side. So we try to keep the access opening on the incisal ridge and we don't involve the incisal edge proper. This way we are saving a lot of tooth structure, and the primary benefit is that when you have an incisal access opening, every file that enters the tooth can go straight inside the canal because you did not start from the palatal side, you started from the incisal edge. So try to make your access openings as incisal as possible. So if you can just visualize this picture, this is a mandibular lateral incisor. And as we know, mandibular incisors tend to have two canals generally. If you were to do an access opening through the cingulum or through the middle third of the tooth, that is a conventional access, you would always end up finding only the labial canal. Remember, whenever you're doing access opening for an anterior tooth, the first canal that you find is the labial canal. So if you want to search for the second canal, don't ever look labially, always look lingually. And the best way to look lingually is to have your access present near the incisal edge, because that way you have easy access to the labial canal as well as the lingual canal. So that was tip number 2 for access opening in anteriors. Tip number 3 also concentrates on anteriors. And when we talk of another tip, what I want to make very clear is whenever you perform access opening for an anterior tooth, please always remember to keep your burr directed as palatally as you can. Because what happens sometimes is once you have done the access opening, as you proceed inside the pulp chamber, you end up going far too labial. You may either perforate this area, that is the cervical part on the labial side, or you may cause a lot of damage of dentine. Now what happens is when you have this kind of damage of dentine and you think of making a crown eventually, you end up cutting so much during the tooth preparation that you eventually end up seeing a perforation on the labial surface. Remember to keep your burr as palatally tilted as possible. Now you may be worried, okay, if I keep it so palatally tilted, will I not end up creating a perforation on the palatal side? That does not generally happen because the incisal edge of the tooth will not allow that to happen. This incisal edge will not allow you to take the burr far too palatal. When you keep your burr palatally directed, you also end up removing this cervical dentine, which was a hindrance for your further instruments. So having spoken about this, see, this is the kind of long axis of the tooth that we are talking about, but our access opening always goes kind of perpendicular or at an angle to the long axis. So what we are saying is we want to go right in line with the long axis, perform an access opening which is located incisally, and go as palatal as possible. You will be right across the long axis of the tooth and straight into the root canal. Coming to the next tip. Now, I don't want you to feel that every anterior access opening has to go palatally, or every molar opening or a premolar opening has to go from the occlusal surface. That is not true. Sometimes we do make some exceptions, because I've often seen that we end up starting the access opening right in the middle of the occlusal surface of the molar, or in the middle of the palatal surface of the anterior tooth. The kind of exceptions I'm talking about are cases where you see a large amount of erosion. For example, you can see this central incisor, maxillary central incisor. There is so much of labial erosion here. If I were to perform a palatal access opening, I would be losing out on a lot of healthy tooth structure, which is not what I want. I want to conserve as much tooth structure as possible. And always remember, for an anterior tooth, if you get a labial access, your life is sorted. These are the simplest instrumentation cases because there will be zero hindrance to your instruments when you start from the labial side. But this will only happen in cases of erosions. Now, if you had an abfraction lesion, abfraction typically happens in the cervical area, you could just prepare a little more of the labial surface and you could do your access opening through the labial surface itself. Again, in abfraction cases or toothbrush abrasion cases, you do not need to perform your access opening from the palatal side. If the loss of tooth structure is significant on the labial side, make sure that your access opening is also labial. Another example that I can give you for this is cases where you have class 2 caries. Now, where you have proximal caries, if you're going to do your access opening through the middle of the tooth, you would have lost the entire central portion of the occlusal surface, plus you will lose out on the part which was already involved in the caries, which is why we support the idea of a caries driven access. By what I mean by this is, we start our access opening right through the caries and we only remove that much tooth structure which is essential for irrigation, instrumentation, and eventually obturation. We don't think of removing all our cuspal ridges, or we don't think of doing a conventional large access cavity preparation. We do a caries driven access in these cases. Does it really help? When you do a caries driven access, what are you going to save? So here, if you can see, this is essentially a caries driven access which we've done from the mesial surface of the tooth. And the patient had an old restoration here. So you can see that a little bit of the occlusal area is involved, but typically, ideally, this will even not be involved. So if you do a caries driven access, you are going to save this much of tooth structure, because your conventional access will require widening and flaring in the distal direction as well. So what you see marked in red is the amount of tooth structure that we are saving by doing an access which is directed only through the caries of the tooth. So this is what I mean when I say that I don't want you to do all of your access openings right in the middle of the occlusal surface of your tooth. Now, moving ahead, coming to the fifth tip. It is very important to have the right kind of instruments or tools, because most cases I can say I have seen that our access openings are limited to a single kind of burr and nothing else. We start with a diamond which may be a straight fissured, or in some cases an inverted cone diamond, or a round ended tapered diamond, and we start the access opening with it and we modify the access opening with the same burr. Although this may work okay after you have got sufficient experience with root canals, it very often tends to cause a lot of loss of tooth structure and other mishaps that can happen. So what are the right kind of tools that we have to use? So let's see one tooth. We are talking of a mandibular molar here, and this is a section tooth. Obviously, what kind of burrs and diamond points are we supposed to use? So we always start with a round diamond burr. When I talk of a round diamond, I'm talking of a burr which is small enough to go inside the chamber. Now, as you progress, at one point, the moment you enter the pulp chamber, you tend to feel a drop. At this point, I want you to remove this burr and keep it aside, because now we'll be using a tungsten carbide or a stainless steel burr, which will be fluted, a burr of this type. Now, this burr, how it helps is, this is the burr that we are going to use for de-roofing the pulp chamber. So if you can see, there is a little bit of a roof, a little bit of a lip here. So this will be removed with this tungsten carbide or stainless steel burr. Why? Because tungsten carbides or stainless steel burrs have flutes and you have much better control over the burr. The cutting is not aggressive. Although they cut much better than diamonds, you have such high control over this tungsten carbide burr that you can not cause damage to the floor of the pulp chamber, and you will precisely do only de-roofing. Once your de-roofing is done, you take a round-ended tapered or a regular tapered fissure burr. But here, it is very important that if you don't have sufficient expertise with access openings or with root canals, it is prudent to use a safe-ended tapered burr. When you use a safe-ended burr, you're sure that you're not going to damage the furcation area. You run this burr along all the walls of the access opening. You make sure that your access opening does not have very converging walls, because if it has very converging walls, instrumentation of the canals will become difficult. Once you have widened the access opening enough for a conventional root canal opening, this is how your access would look. Now, once I've got this, and I want you to note here very importantly that my access opening is not just straight. It is not just divergent as well. It goes straight in a particular area and then it tends to flare as it comes coronally. This flaring is important because every time I insert an instrument inside my root canals, they are going to rub against this part of the tooth. As they rub against this part of the tooth, there is a high possibility of transportation of the canal or creating a ledge or even separation of instruments. So it becomes important to use the right kind of burrs, and burrs are not the only kind of thing that we need. There are certain specialized burrs. There are also certain specialized ultrasonic tips that you will require in some cases, not always. So one burr that I want to talk about here is the Allen burr, which is basically short for a long neck burr. Now, a long neck burr, basically the advantage is that the tip of the burr or the cutting part of the burr is extremely tiny. It is 0.6 millimeters, which is really, really small. And the shank of the burr is very long. Because of this long shank or the long neck, what happens is you have fantastic visibility. This is my burr of choice whenever I cannot locate a canal. Say I'm working on the maxillary first molar, and I heard an endodontic lecture where they told me that I should always find an MB2. I've been struggling, but I'm not finding that MB2. What you do is you take your Allen burr, start roughing the area where you are expected to find the MB2. This burr cuts so selectively in exactly the area where you want it to cut, you will never go wrong. And in some rare cases where you feel that the Allen burr is not working, you can use ultrasonic tips. Just to familiarize you with the terms, Allen burrs are available from a lot of companies by different names. They are called as Moons burrs. They are called as Mueller burrs. They are just called as long neck or long shank burrs. So don't get confused. They are essentially the same. The only thing you need to take care of is that the tip of the burr or the cutting area of the burr should be really small and it should be round. There are other burrs which are available, which will be tungsten carbide, but they will be tapered fissure. Although they are meant for modifying the axis, the purpose of a long neck burr and a tapered fissure burr are different. And now if the long neck burr is not working well for you, then you may require the use of an ultrasonic tip. Now these ultrasonic tips are available from a lot of different brands now, which are specially meant for endodontics. I'm not talking of ultrasonic tips which are meant for your scaling or periodontal uses. We are talking of endodontic ultrasonic tips. You get access refining tips, you get access modifying tips, you get roughing tips. So the tips that you see here are from Woodpecker, available in a series like E3T, E4T, E5T, E3D, E4D, E5D. Just minor changes in the material used for making the tip and in the geometry of the tip. Most of these tips will be diamond coated at the tip, and this diamond coating helps you in modifying your orifice area. Some of these tips can also be used for enlarging the orifice. Some can be used when there has been an instrument separation and you want to widen the canal for retrieving the instrument. So a lot of different kinds of tips are available. Now, now in case that there might also be cases where these tips, there might be cases when in spite of using the ultrasonic tips, you may not be able to identify your canals. And if you can't identify your canals, then there are some other additional steps also that we perform. Like you may use a dye for staining the floor of the pulp chamber, and then you may see it. But the most important points will remain your vision of the pulp chamber and the illumination that you can reflect inside the chamber. I'll also share a few tips about how to find canals, but right now we are just talking of tips for modifying the access opening. Coming to our tip number 6. What if you have a poor access for access? What do I mean by this? There are times when you have a patient who cannot open his mouth sufficiently. So there may be a patient who has OSMF. There may be a patient who has temporary trismus. There may be a patient in which you have to do a root canal for a mandibular third molar, and which is why you don't have sufficient access for performing an access opening satisfactorily. Because I've often seen, practitioners complaining that preparation is okay. The canal preparation or the BMP I'll accomplish with my rotary instruments, but I'm not being able to gain access into the pulp chamber. So we are talking of those kind of cases. So let's take this one case where the mouth opening of the patient is restricted and she cannot open her mouth sufficiently for me to open the access. Every time I try to put my air rotor inside, I'm sure that whatever I do, I'll not be able to reach the pulp chamber without causing iatrogenic damage to the surrounding tooth structure. Now, there are many different ways of dealing with this. If you think of very advanced ways or very invasive ways, then you may start the patient with certain mouth gag exercises. You may inject a few drugs into the muscles of that area so the muscular spasm is relieved. You may inject drugs for breaking the OSMF bands, which is typically hyaluronic acid that we inject in that area. But thinking in the most conservative terms, we need to think that the air rotors that we are using, they have a thick head. The height and the thickness both are large. And when you think of these air rotors, these are typically those high torque air rotors that we use, because we don't want our air rotors to stall when we are using them. And in such high torque air rotors, the size is very large. So you need to get an air rotor which has a mini head. A mini head air rotor, although you may feel that, I'm not going to use this sufficiently, this is only for a one-off case, which I may have in a few months, you will realize that a mini head air rotor works fantastic for cases of restricted mouth opening. Even for your regular routine molars, you will realize the difference once you get a mini headed air rotor. All brands of air rotors that are available today will generally have a variant which will have a mini head as well. Now, when I talk of a mini head, is it really going to make that much of a difference? Like if I see here, I have 2 millimeters, 3 millimeters tops. Is that much going to matter? Yes, those 2 or 3 millimeter is a lot when you talk of doing an access opening on a molar, because when you enter the molar area, for the patient to even give you an extra half millimeter is very difficult. Now think, if you have a difference of 3 millimeters between these two air rotors, you are going to save a lot of time and a lot of effort forcing your patient to open his mouth. Obviously, you will still require a bite block or a mouth gag for opening sufficiently, but you will save a large amount of tooth structure. I will also talk about teeth which are tilted, but we'll come to that a little later. Now, the next tip, or the 7th tip that I want to share with you here is, talking of mandibular first premolars, we've always known right from our dental anatomy days that a mandibular first premolar tends to have an angle between the root and the crown. So your root is generally straight, but the crown has a tilt. Now, in these cases, it's important to realize how we will be doing our access opening, because believe it or not, it is common for us to create a lot of gouging. If you see post-operative x-rays, post-obturated, post-restored x-rays of mandibular first premolars, you will realize how much extra tooth structure had been lost. Because what we tend to do is, we generally start from the middle. We think this is the central pit, and we start and we go straight inside. And when you go straight inside, right from the central pit, you end up going too palatally. If you direct your burr along the long axis of the tooth, which is this red line, and if you still go from the central pit, you may go to buccally. So the recommended place for your access opening is somewhere between the central pit and the cusp tip, as close to the cusp tip as possible, and then you are supposed to go right into the pulp chamber. So to put it into an occlusal perspective, if this is how your mandibular first premolar looks on your from the occlusal view, this is the line which is intersecting the central pit from where you were going to start your access opening. And this purple second line that you see goes right through the cusp tip or the cuspal ridges, the slopes. Now, your access opening should be in between these two lines, as labial or as buccal as possible. There are also practitioners who prefer to keep their access opening on the cusp tip. You keep it on the cusp tip and you go straight inside. You get a fantastic access right till the apical area. This is especially important when we are expecting to find two canals in the premolar. Please go right through the cusp tip. It works amazing. So the tip number 7 was always start your access opening between the central pit and the cusp tip. Going to tip number 8. I'm sure you can recognize these are pulp stones or pulpal calcifications that we find inside the pulp chambers. And the next tip is going to be about managing cases which have a pulp stone in the chamber. Now, most typically, you will find pulp stones in elderly patients, or because of deposition of tertiary dentine. You may also find pulp stones in cases where you have a cervical abrasion, toothbrush abrasion in a young individual. You may see pulp stones right in the middle of the pulp chamber. If the pulp stones are small and round in shape, it is generally easier to remove them. Let's see how we remove these pulp stones or how we manage these pulp stones. So this is a case where you can see that the entire pulp chamber as well as the coronal third of the root canals is calcified. Now, the easiest way or the first way that you should try to remove a pulp chamber is by using an endodontic excavator. Does it sound alien? Now, an endodontic excavator is a spoon excavator, which is really small in size. The tip of the endodontic excavator is very sharp and very small. So it helps you to put the excavator exactly in between your pulp stone and the walls of the pulp chamber. You just need to wiggle it a little bit, and most pulp stones will become loose at this stage itself. And by most, I mean about 80 to 90% of pulp stones can be removed with an endodontic excavator. If you're wondering what exactly it is or from where you could get it, the one that I use is from U3D. It is called EX31L. And I'm in love with this instrument. I can vouch for it. Whenever I need to remove a pulp stone, this is the first instrument that I need. It will also help you to remove the vital pulp tissue from the coronal pulp, from the pulp chamber. Now, in some cases, the pulp stone is attached to the walls of the pulp chamber in such a way that it is very difficult to remove it with an endodontic excavator. So what do you do in such cases? Now, in these cases, we are going to use an ultrasonic tip, the same endodontic ultrasonic tips that I spoke about. These tips are to be vibrated inside the canal. They are to be activated, and because of the ultrasonic activations, they tend to loosen the pulp stone from the walls. However, sometimes the pulp stone is bound so tightly with the walls of the pulp chamber that it becomes difficult even with an ultrasonic tip. And only in these cases, we start with a small round burr. We start drilling through the pulp stone, slowly making sure that after every few seconds, we stop and check if we have located the root canals. This is a rare occurrence. Now, how do you know if you have found the root canals? Do you need to put a file every time? No, you don't. Generally, whenever you see a pulp stone in the chamber, you will have vital pulp tissue around it. So if you have removed the stone and if you touch pulp tissue, that pulp tissue will start bleeding and you will know that you don't need to drill much further. This is where your vital pulp is present, and always through the vital pulp, you can gain adequate access to your root canal. I'm sorry. My tip number 9 for today is about locating your root canals. Now, locating the orifices of the canals, let's say. So far, we've been talking about gaining access into the chamber, refining your access, and removing your impediments or your pulp stones. The next challenge is, okay, I've done everything, but how do I find canals? The easiest way to find canals is by using a mirror, obviously, because once you have good visibility, you will be able to see where the root canal orifices are located. But it is not always that simple. There are a lot of ways of finding root canals. Like I told you, we can use dyes, you can use radiographs, you can use a CBCT, you can use an endodontic explorer, that is your DG16 explorer, for pinpointing the openings of the root canals. So, but because this is a tips and tricks section, I'm not going to teach you how to find canals. I'm just going to share a few clinical tips so that it becomes easier for you to find your root canals. Let's take this molar, for example, maxillary third molar. section at the level of the cemento enamel junction or the CEJ. A couple of things you should always remember is your pulp chamber is always present exactly in the middle of the tooth at the level of the CEJ, which you can clearly see here, which means that the amount of radicular dentine present around the pulp chamber is going to be same in thickness. How is this clinically important? Because once you have gained an access, if you feel that you are not in the center of the tooth at the cervical area, you need to change the direction of your access opening. Another thing that you can realize by looking at these pictures is the floor of the pulp chamber is quite dark compared to the walls. So the floor will always be grayish in color. It has very low value. If you understand value, the brightness is very low. So it typically looks dark. Even after reflecting light, you will be able to make out that the color of the pulp chamber is darker than the color of the floor of the pulp chamber is darker than the color of the walls of the pulp chamber. This is a fantastic tip because it's important to understand that all root canals are present at the junction of the floor of the pulp chamber and the wall. So you will never have a root canal present here because this is the floor. This is not the junction. However, this, if you can see, these are all at the junction of the floor and the wall of the pulp chamber. All of these 4 canals like you can visualize here. Now, another point that I'll make clear here is, another point that I want to tell you is the root canal orifices are always present at the ends of the dentinal map. Let's go back to dentinal map. If you remember the development of the roots of a tooth, it happens in the form of lobes. And these are these lobes, they generally basically that Hertwig's epithelial root sheath is there, and those foldings, they come close to each other, and at one point they fuse. This fusion of the foldings is a junction which is called as the dentinal map, which is typically brownish gray in color, easily visualized if you have good illumination, and I'm sure you'll be able to see it in most of the molars that you open. Now, if you can see this dentinal map, and let's say you cannot locate this distobuccal canal in this maxillary first molar, the only thing you need to do is, you've seen this canal, you start tracing the dentinal map, you see that the map is going in this direction, but you're not being able to find any canal here. So the only thing you do is you keep tracing along the dentinal map, and the moment the dentinal map ends, you stop. Now, you take either your ultrasonic tips or you take the troughing burrs, that was the Allen burr, and you start drilling in this area. Very selectively, very conservatively, you start drilling in that area. And then I'm sure using a DG16 Explorer or using your ultrasonic tips or a 10-number K file, you will be able to locate any missing canals. Talking of teeth in particular, the most important tooth where we have missed canals obviously is the maxillary first molar, because there is an MB2 canal that we tend to miss or we just don't attempt to find. So when we talk of a maxillary first molar, how do you find the MB2? The first thing is that an MB2 is always present. Please drill this into your head, because in approximately 60 to 90% of maxillary first molars, you have 2 mesiobuccal canals, the MB1 and the MB2. So it's very important to understand that just because you found the mesiobuccal, distobuccal and the palatal canals, you cannot stop. You have to find the MB2 canal. So you may be thinking, I've tried very often, but I can't seem to locate that canal. So is there any trick to locate these MB2 canals as well? Yes, of course there is. And the best way to find your MB2 is to remember that the MB2 canal is always located palatal to the main mesiobuccal canal or your MB1 canal. This is the first tip. Second way, the second tip is the distance of the MB2 from the main mesiobuccal canal is going to be approximately 2 to 3 millimeters. So if you realize 2 to 3 millimeters is a large distance, it is not located very close to your MB2. Now, this distance, this basically tells you that you are supposed to look somewhere in this area, right? But you still don't know whether it will be present here or here or here or here. So the last tip I want to give you about finding the MB2 canal is the MB2 canal is always located. Please listen carefully. The MB2 canal is always located mesial to a line which a line which joins the main mesiobuccal canal with the palatal canal. So if you draw an imaginary line from the mesiobuccal to the palatal canal, your MB2 will be located mesial to this line. This makes it very clear that I don't have to search for an MB2 here. I only have to search it in this much area. Now I can just start troughing in this area and I'll find my MB2 canal. So this was about finding MB2. And then there is also another canal, which is extra canal, which is commonly found, and that is the middle mesial canal of a mandibular first molar. Now, what do we mean by a middle mesial canal? Let me just get you acquainted with this picture. This is my mesiobuccal canal. This is my mesiolingual canal. And here is my distal canal, which is hidden and you cannot see it right now. And you see that there is an extra mesial canal. There are 3 mesial canals here. So this extra mesial canal that you see is termed as the middle mesial canal. The middle mesial canal is located between your mesiobuccal and mesiolingual canals. It may not always necessarily be in the center of the 2 canals or in the middle of the 2 canals. It may be located a little buccally. It may be sometimes, very rarely, located a little lingually. Do you have to attempt finding the middle mesial canal in every single mandibular first molar? No. Middle mesial canal is present in roughly about 10 to 15% of mandibular first molars. So how I go about this is, if I feel that my mesiobuccal and mesiolingual canals are very close to each other, I'll not work very hard to find the middle mesial canal. But if I see that mesiobuccal and mesiolingual are far away, there is a distance of about 4 or 5 millimeters between them, then most definitely I'll try very hard to see if I can find a middle mesial canal. This middle mesial canal or the MB2 canal may eventually join one of the main canals in the course of the canal, but sometimes they may also be a completely separate canal right up till the apex. So that was about locating canals. And coming to our final and 10th tip, I want to talk about doing an access opening through indirect restorations. Now, sometimes we see cases where, say 5 years back, the patient came to you, the tooth had a large carious lesion, but the pulp was still vital, and so you wanted to do an onlay. You did an onlay for this patient, but today, after 5 years, this patient is coming back to you and he tells you that, doctor, this onlay was done 5 years back and now I have some trouble, and you decide that you want to do a root canal in this tooth. How do you start with the access opening? The most important point is, with what material did you make that onlay? Now, this also holds true for crowns. Like sometimes we have FPD abutments. You've placed a 6-unit bridge and it is not possible for you to remove or retrieve the entire bridge just for one root canal of the abutment tooth. So what do you do here basically is, you start your access through the crown. Now, starting access through the crown, so what kind of burrs should I use for this? Let's see this case. This tooth has a full crown. The pulp inside was vital, but today it requires a root canal treatment. So how do you start? In case this is a metal crown, you will start with metal cutting burrs. But more often than never, we see that these are PFM crowns, because we used to use PFM earlier. So porcelain fused to metal crowns will have a margin of metal or a covering of ceramic, sorry. So this covering of ceramic should be drilled through using a diamond burr, not a tungsten carbide or stainless steel, but using a diamond point. You drill the coronal 1 or 2 millimeters, and the moment you reach metal, you take the burr away and you start using a trans-metal burr or a metal cutting burr. These are typically tungsten carbide burrs, and they have cross cuts across the flutes. These cross cuts help to gain easy cutting of the metal. So you will use this cross cut burr. The tip is also cutting, so it will help you to penetrate the metal as well. And then you will enter the dentine. Once you have entered the dentine, you may go back to your diamond, or you may continue with a trans metal burr. I always prefer for beginners to use a diamond because the amount of control that you have on this diamond is going to be better than a cross-cut tungsten carbide burr, because a cross-cut tungsten carbide or a transmetal burr, like we call them, it has a tendency to vibrate a little bit. So what I do is I will take a diamond again and I will reach the pulp chamber. The moment I feel the drop, I will keep this diamond aside. I will take my transmetal burr one more time, and this time I will use the transmetal for widening my axis, because there is still going to be metal in the crown. So just to widen the axis, I'll use a transmetal, and then you can go to your safe-ended burr if you need. So this is basically how we gain access through a full crown. Now, sometimes your full crown or your onlay would have changed the direction or changed the inclination of your tooth. So if you see this tooth now here, the tooth is originally tilted, but if you look from the occlusal area, it looks like the crown is perfectly placed, like the tooth is not tilted. That is what you see here. One way to know is obviously by taking radiographs, but if it is a buccal tilt or a palatal tilt, you will not be able to see it in radiographs. So what you do basically is, if you're not sure of the angulation, or if you have doubts that something is wrong in this tooth and it's going to trouble me later, the safest thing, see now, if you were to do an axis opening, you would have gone straight from the center of the tooth, and unnecessarily you would have removed a lot of dentine in this area. Plus, you would have missed out on this pulp tissue which is present here. So what you should do is you take a periodontal probe, you put it on the side inside the gingival sulcus like this. You keep the periodontal probe there. Do not remove it. You can ask your assistant to hold it if required. Don't remove the periodontal probe. This periodontal probe gives you an idea of the tilt of the tooth. Now you take your burrs for axis opening and you make sure that your burr enters parallel to the direction of the periodontal probe, which you can see clearly in this image. The round burr and the periodontal probe are parallel to each other. You do not need to go through so much of hassle for every case. But whenever in doubt that the tooth is not straight, this happens very commonly, mind you, in mandibular third molars. They are mesially tilted because of loss of a first molar or a second molar. You start, so your tooth is tilted, so the occlusal surface is sloping, and you decide to start your axis opening like this, and you end up perforating in the mesial side. So if you would have just put a periodontal probe in the mesial area, you would have known that you are supposed to start your axis opening parallel to that periodontal probe. And this is the kind of axis opening that you can then imagine. Now this axis opening, although not perpendicular to your coronal restoration, it will always be in the line of the long axis of the tooth. So now that our 10 tips are done, we obviously enjoy some freebies always. So I'm going to share 2 bonus tips because I didn't want to miss out on these points. They are important. So let us just see 2 extra tips before we wind up. The first tip that I want to talk about is the conservative accesses that we do. And why do I want to talk about conservative accesses? Because as we are moving into more and more of rotary endodontics and greater tapered instruments and progressively tapered instruments, we are seeing that the number of vertical root fractures that we are seeing is increasing tremendously. I'm sure all of you have encountered this in practice. And one way to take care of not having a lot of root fractures is by performing a conservative axis opening. Now, when I talk of a conservative axis, what a conservative axis means is traditionally your axis is used to diverge slightly as you went coronally. A conservative axis opening, however, would converge slightly in the coronal direction. So in one go, you cannot visualize all the root canals. Like this is a mandibular second molar that you see here. I cannot see the mesiobuccal, mesiolingual and distal together. I can only see the mesiolingual right now. So this is one of the drawbacks of performing an axis opening. But if you tilt your mirror a little bit, you will generally be able to see all the orifices. So after you've obturated this tooth, this is what a conservative opening would look like. You would have an axis which is a little smaller than the pulp chamber. So you've saved a lot of tooth structure in this area. Now these teeth, if the remaining tooth structure is good, and if you have not damaged the cuspal ridges and oblique ridges, you do not need to provide cuspal coverage. Obviously, case selection will vary case to case, but a lot of cases you will not need to provide any cuspal coverage if you have performed a conservative access opening in a tooth which had sufficient remaining tooth structure. Now, talking of conservative, there are also cases where we've gone into ultra conservative access. So ultra conservative is also known as truss accesses. When you talk of a truss access, what truss basically means is the supporting structure. So if you have left the supporting structure of the tooth intact, and if you can perform your access opening on the sides of the supporting structure, please understand this tooth here, the cuspal ridges are the supporting structure. So I'm not involving the cuspal ridge. I know that mesially there are generally two canals and they will be located in line with the buccal cusp tip. So what I do is I make a ditch here. I enlarge it a little bit buccolingually. Once I have enlarged here, I do not join it with the distal access opening. So I've got two access openings here, and I'm going to perform all of my instrumentation only through these two holes. I'm going to keep this entire structure intact. Is it advantageous to do this? See, it has its own advantages. So if I have a case where because of occlusal trauma or biting forces, a tooth has become non-vital, or there is undermining caries in a single pit, which has gone deep, but it has not involved too much of the tooth structure. So such cases, I find these to be beautiful candidates for a truss access. To make you familiar with another term, truss accesses are also known as ninja accesses because only a ninja can perform a root canal through these kind of accesses. Now, if you had a class 2 caries, let's say I had a deep mesial caries, which was not involving a large amount of tooth structure, it was only going deep towards the pulp. Fantastic cases for a truss access because I can do a caries driven access in the mesial direction and a separate independent conservative access for the distal canal. I can perform my instrumentation, irrigation, obturation through this, and I may not require a crown if the tooth has sufficient tooth structure remaining. That was tip number 11. And the last tip for the day and the second bonus tip for you, free, is this. How do you protect a weak tooth? Now, you may have a tooth where there is gross caries. Let's see a picture here. Yeah, this tooth. Now I know that if I remove all of this caries, I am going to be left with nothing. Very often we see that there is mesial caries and there is distal caries, and the only thing that is left is the buccal wall and the lingual wall, and both of these walls are very fragile. So for such fragile buccal and lingual walls, after you've done an access opening, you've placed your temporary restoration, and before the second sitting, the patient calls you up that, doctor, I think a part of my tooth is broken. Is this not a common scenario? Obviously it is. And the best way to avoid this scenario is very simple. What you should do is you place an orthodontic band around the remaining tooth structure. Make sure the orthodontic band goes subgingivally like it is supposed to. And then you clean out all the caries from the tooth. You perform your access opening and you pack it up. You may wish to pack it with something like glass ionomer cement, which has a little more strength than your temporary materials like Cavit. Or even if you are using Cavit, it is perfectly fine because this band is going to protect the tooth. So can I leave this band as it is forever? No, you cannot. Because root canal treated weak teeth will generally require a post and core restoration. And most importantly, they will require cuspal coverage. Now for cuspal coverage, what you need to do obviously is you need to remove this band, do a definitive restoration on the tooth, do your tooth preparation and give an onlay or a crown as the case demands. So I hope all of these tips have been useful to you. Short presentation because we only wanted to discuss clinical tips with you today. We are through with about 55 minutes and my job is basically done here. And there is this beautiful quote that if you do a good beginning to your root canal treatment, your job is half done, or I'll say it is more than half done. Because always remember, one thing I've realized is if you are doing an access opening which is far too large, it becomes difficult to locate your canals because your canals are then present on the pulp chamber because you've cut too much. But if your canals were present at the junction of the wall and the floor, it's very easy to blindly put a file there and it enters the canal. So make sure that this first step goes very smooth so that the rest of the treatment goes very well. Thank you so much. Thanks, Dr. Samira. Welcome back. We are open to questions. Dr. Samira must have noted down a few questions from the comments on the Facebook page. So please let me know if there are any questions.
Fantastic presentation, Dr. Harsh. Very useful tips you have given to us. The first question from my side, the last tip that you gave of placing a band, it has to be cemented?
It has to be cemented, yes.
Okay.
So you, if it's a pre-contoured band, you will just need minor adjustments. If you're making a band, you first adjust the entire band, you remove it, and then you put some glass ionomer and you cement it in place. Because otherwise the amount of leakage at the corners of the band can be a lot.
Right, okay. The next question is about this conservative access preparations, like your truss cavity. How will you ensure that the entire pulp chamber, like you have removed the tissue from the entire pulp chamber?
Okay, fantastic question. So, see, when we go to truss, I'll just go back a couple of slides so it becomes clearer. Yeah, let's see this case now. I have opened the truss axis here. But Dr. Samira's question here is, there must be pulp tissue under this truss also.
Exactly, yeah.
So how do you remove that? It's very simple. You use a scaler tip, a regular scaling ultrasonic tip, I'm saying, not a specialized endo tip. You run that scaler tip inside your pulp chamber, you vibrate it. There's going to be irrigation along with the scaler tip. So that irrigation along with the ultrasonic vibrations loosens all of the pulpal debris that is present there, and it helps you to clean everything. So the next time when you irrigate, you will see a lot of pulp coming out from the chamber.
Okay.
So I hope that answers your question.
Okay. I wanted to know, any tips on reading the radiograph for successful access preparation?
Reading a radiograph, this becomes very important when, you know, let's take a case where you've started your access and you don't get a drop.
Right.
So this drop, like very often we feel that, yeah, I'm not getting a drop. Let me go deeper, let me go deeper, let me go deeper. And then you may end up perforating. So it becomes important to take your radiograph, take your burr, put a stopper on the burr and adjust the stopper from the coronal most reference point up till the furcation area. That is the floor of the pulp chamber. So you are always sure that you're not going to insert your burr any more than this inside the chamber. So even if you don't feel a drop, like it may happen in an older patient where you have a lot of calcification in the pulp chamber, you may not feel any drop at all. So in these cases, it becomes important to study your radiograph even better. Another important role that radiographs will play for access opening, I'm talking, are for knowing if the tooth is tilted, which typically you will see in mandibular second and third molars, especially if your first molar is missing, these teeth are tilted and we end up creating a mesial perforation. So such cases, your radiographs help you a lot.
What about the pulp stone? Can we see pulp stone on the radiograph?
Generally, you can. So if it's a well-defined stone, you will be able to make out a round shaped thing right in the middle of the pulp chamber. Or sometimes what happens is you will see that the pulp chamber in all the other teeth look very clear, but on the tooth that has caries or has an old restoration or that is giving pain to the patient, you will see that the pulp chamber is a little hazy. It's not as radiolucent as it is in the other teeth. So this gives you a rough idea that some amount of calcification of the pulp chamber pulp has already started.
So a periapical radiograph will be more useful, or a bite wing to view pulp stone?
A bite wing is definitely more useful, but let's be practical. Nobody takes bite wing just for visualizing a pulp stone. We may take for caries or other periodontal conditions, but generally we have a periapical which shows us the coronal area as well. When in doubt, you can take an additional bite wing, but otherwise a periapical also gives you a fair enough idea.
Okay. The next question is from Dr. Swati Survade. She is asking how to ensure that we have removed complete carious portion when we are doing access opening through the crown.
Okay, so the first thing is I will never advise access opening through a crown. If it is a single crown, if you can remove it, please go ahead and remove the crown. Because what happens is all crowns, they block light. So the amount of visibility of the pulp chamber is greatly compromised in these cases. So if you try to do your access opening through the crown, you cannot see too much. You may be able to see caries present in the chamber, but you will never be able to see caries which are present in the gingival area of a class 2 restoration that was done before the crown was made,
Right.
or caries which are present in the finish line area of the crown. So being a prosthodontist, Dr. Sameera can tell you how much of damage crowns can cause to your teeth. So ill-fitting crowns can cause to your teeth.
Yes, yes, that's
So
better.
it's absolutely impossible to see all of the caries.
Right.
But if you have widened sufficiently, so sometimes you need to widen a little more when you have a crown, you can just apply a caries disclosing dye, and that will give you a fair enough idea about how much of caries is left behind.
And
So
can
only
we
if you have a
also,
long span bridge, you will
Yeah.
want to do an access opening through.
Right. And can we also do RCT through a crown?
Same indication. So if it's a long span bridge, or if it is a very structurally compromised tooth, you know that if I remove this crown, even if I cut and section and remove the crown, there is a large possibility that the tooth will fracture. Only those cases you will want to do your re-RC through a crown. But very strongly, I'll tell you, at least re-RCTs don't attempt through crowns. It's difficult to visualize anything inside the chamber.
Right. It all looks dark.
Everything looks dark.
Yeah.
Everything looks black. So whatever
Yes,
I told you
yes.
today, the pulp chamber, the floor of the pulp chamber is darker than the walls.
Yeah.
These kind of things you cannot visualize.
Cannot.
The dentinal map and all you can never visualize.
Yeah. The next question is from Dr. Sonmit Singh. He is asking, he wants to know if the Ellen burr is to be used in slow speed handpiece only, or can they be used with adapters to air rotor handpieces also?
No, so Ellen burrs are only available with a latch type attachment, which will fit either on your contra-angle handpiece or on your endomotor. So I generally use it on my endomotor at about 1000 RPM. Or if I want to drill a little more, then I'll use it on my contra angle at 2 to 3000 RPM. So which is still considerably slower compared to your air rotor. So you get it only for your slow speed handpieces. So that is how we are going to use it.
Okay. And next question is how safe, how necessary it is to use a safe-ended burr?
If you have good exposure, good experience with root canals, you don't necessarily require a safe-ended burr. But if you want to be 100% safe, not touch the floor of the pulp chamber at all, then a safe-ended burr works wonders. There's most of these safe-ended burrs, they'll have flutes. They are fluted tungsten carbides, extremely strong, extremely fast cutting. So you don't really need to be too careful about what you are doing. You can finish your work very quickly. Especially if you're a beginner, please use safe-ended burrs, because we've seen a lot of cases where the floor of the pulp chamber is damaged. Although you may have not perforated at this moment, but once you've damaged the furcation area, there is a very high possibility of a fracture happening sometime in the future.
Okay.
So if you're not confident, use a safe-ended. If you are 100% sure you're not going to touch, and if you are sure of not destroying any part, then you can use a regular burr.
Okay. And can you give us some tips on how to avoid perforating the floor other than using the safe-ended burr?
The second way to avoid, one is obviously using a safe-ended burr.
Yeah.
The second way to do it is, if you're a beginner, every single time take a preoperative radiograph, mark your burr at the depth. So on an average at about 7 millimeters, you will reach the pulp chamber in most molars. And at 9 millimeters, you will touch the floor of the pulp chamber. So if you are exceeding 9 millimeters, the floor is definitely destroyed. You are going to end up perforating. So make sure to take a preoperative radiograph, compare your burr with that preoperative radiograph. And like I already told you, take a stopper, adjust it at about 7 millimeters and start your access opening. So this way, most definitely you'll never perform furcation perforations.
Dr. Sarika Parekh, she's asking, can you suggest some safe-ended burrs, the company name?
My favorite safe-ended burr is an Endo Z, which is from Dentsply, Endo Z. This is a golden colored burr from Dentsply. It is safe-ended, it is tungsten carbide, and it is fluted, so it has fantastic cutting efficiency.
Okay. And now coming on to the last question, Doc. So I don't always feel a drop when I'm doing access opening. So is it normal?
It is okay to not feel a drop because this will especially happen when the size of the pulp chamber is very small. So with age, the pulp chamber basically recedes and the chamber starts becoming smaller. So your round burr will generally not give you a drop in such cases.
Okay.
But another possible reason could be presence of calcification in the chamber. So the first thing you need to check is, are you using a really small round burr? Because if you're using a burr which is larger than the depth of the chamber, then you are definitely not going to feel that drop. So make sure that you use a really small round burr, and most cases you will feel a drop. If not, then you start adjusting the stopper, and you know what I told you on radiograph, you adjust the stopper on the burr to make sure that you're not perforating anywhere.
Okay. Thank you so much, doctor. It was wonderful having you over here. Over
My
to you,
pleasure.
sir.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Harsh, as usual.
Thank you so much,
Wonderful
sir. Thanks for
presentation.
having me here. And thanks
Samira?
to Future Dent
Yes, sir.
and Famdent Publications for this, for organizing this entire thing along with Cipla.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Samira, was that summary done of all the 10 tips?
No.
So if
Oh,
you can just
she's-
quickly
Yeah.
do a short summary of those 10 tips so that some people who missed the beginning can at
Yes,
least
yes, they can
know
at least see it.
just tip 1 to 10 or 1 to 12, I guess.
Yeah, 1 to 12. So I don't have it noted down as a list. So I'll just run quickly through these tips.
Yeah, sure.
The first tip that we discussed, obviously, yes, here. The first tip that we discussed was vision. Visibility is very important. Illumination is important. So start using a good front surface mirror. Second thing is, for your anterior teeth, make sure your access openings are always placed as incisely as possible. For your anterior teeth, always remember that your burr should be directed as palatally as it is possible. Don't keep it perpendicular to the palatal surface of the tooth, or don't keep it far too labial. Keep it as palatal as you can. The fourth tip is, make sure that your access goes either from the area of the tooth that is damaged maximum, which may be your erosion, abrasion, attrition, or it could even be caries. And the fifth tip was, always make sure you have the right burrs. So we discussed about diamonds, we discussed about carbides, and then we spoke about LN burrs, and finally ultrasonic tips. Because if you don't have the right armamentarium, you are going to do kaam chalao jugad, and it will cause more damage than good. In case you have poor access due to OSMF or a wisdom tooth present in the area, or it is transient trismus, you may always consider using a small headed air rotor, because a small headed air rotor conserves a lot of mouth opening for the patient. Whenever you are working on a mandibular premolar tooth, the mandibular first premolar especially, the seventh tip tells you that you should not go along the long axis of the crown. You should go along the long axis of the root, which means that your access opening essentially should be in the region between the cusp tip and the central pit of the tooth. Tip number 8 was about retrieving pulp stones or removing pulp stones from the pulp chamber. We remove pulp stones. We first attempt it by using an endodontic excavator. If it does not help, we use endodontic ultrasonic tips. We activate the tips, and that generally loosens the pulp stone. If it does not help, as a last resort, you use a really small round burr and you start drilling through the pulp stone, being sure that you are not cutting extra tooth structure. Tip number 9 was about how do we find canals. So we discussed that the pulp chamber is always present right in the middle of the tooth in the cervical area. Your pulp chamber floor is always colored darker than the walls of the pulp chamber. The root canals are always present at the junction of the floor and walls of the pulp chamber, and the orifices of the root canals are present at the ends of your dentinal tubules. For MB2, we discussed that there are 3 points that we keep in mind. Your MB2 is always going to be present palatal to the main mesiobuccal canal. It is always going to be about 1 to 3 millimeters away from the main mesiobuccal canal, and it is located mesial to a line which joins the main MB with the palatal. For middle mesial canals, I told you we only need to struggle finding the middle mesial if the mesiobuccal and the mesiolingual canal of a mandibular first molar are located far away from each other. The 10th tip was about gaining access through indirect restorations like crowns, onlays, or overlays. Now, we said that to drill through porcelain, you need a diamond burr. To drill through metal, you need a tungsten carbide cross-cut transmetal burr. And always remember that if the tooth is tilted, take preoperative radiographs, or if there is any confusion, use a periodontal probe to get the correct access to the tooth. You put a periodontal probe inside the gingival sulcus, and your round burr, which you will use for access opening, should enter right from the middle of the tooth in a direction which is parallel to the periodontal probe. So this will make sure that you enter the pulp chamber only and you don't destroy any unnecessary tooth structure. The two bonus tips were, the first one was about the kind of access that you need for conserving tooth structure. That was your conservative accesses. And then we also spoke about truss accesses, which can work fantastic when you have good crown structure remaining. And then the last tip that we discussed today was about protecting weak teeth by using an orthodontic band and removing the orthodontic band only when all the other treatment is complete and you are ready to place a crown. So that was a short summary about all that we saw today.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Harsh. Really appreciate you going
sir,
through this summary also. And these question and answer sessions were brought to you by Innovamox 625 CV. And of course, the session was brought to you by Dentoscope Academy. I think we have crossed almost like 50 sessions in this pandemic. Very successful speakers, very good audience. Of course, I must appreciate the audience because without an audience, no webinar is successful. So continuing on the Endo series, the next in line, as it should be chronologically, is 10 top tips on biomechanical preparation of root canals, which will be on Wednesday at 7 p.m. by Dr. Garima Poddar. So we'll look forward to seeing you again on Wednesday. You have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay blessed. Bye-bye and good night.
Thank you so much, sir.
Good
Thank
night.
you, Dr. Samira. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Good night.